I'd like to talk today about the subject of truth. I don't want to talk about what I believe is true or isn't true. I just want to talk about truth itself, because I'm one who believes that there is confusion today in the land, has been for some time, about what truth is or whether it's really important or not. And I'd like to see if we could get a little bit of guidance from the scripture on this. And so I'm calling this talk Truth and Proof, and beginning by looking at John chapter 20, verses 24 through 28. Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But Thomas said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand, and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Have you ever asked yourself either or both of these two questions? First, how do I know what I know? And second, how much of my life do I base on that knowledge? The Apostle Thomas, known for his skepticism, withheld his beliefs until receiving an answer to his one simple request: "Show me." Thomas needed proof. He needed proof before he could say, "This much I know is true." For the second question, how much of his life did he base on his beliefs? The answer was everything. Thomas was martyred for those beliefs. Who was Thomas anyway? We know more about the other apostles, but Thomas, not much, I'm afraid. We simply label him and probably discount him as being Doubting Thomas and let it go at that. But that's selling him short. It's giving him a bum rap. We know, for example, that despite his doubting the resurrection of Christ, he was steadfast in his loyalty to that Christ. When Jesus made the fateful decision to go to Jerusalem, where he would be arrested, John records Thomas as standing up and saying, "Let us also go, so that we may die with him." And even though Thomas asked for proof from Christ of his resurrection, once he got it, he devoted the remainder of his life to preaching that resurrection message to others. Tradition tells us that he went to India, founded a Christian community there, and was speared to death for his efforts. Another thing we know about Thomas is that he was not afraid to ask questions. When other disciples may have wondered about things but were reluctant to ask, Thomas stood up and asked. Not only did Thomas ask the big question when he sought proof of Jesus' resurrection, but he had earlier asked another important question of Christ. When Jesus said he was going away and that he was leaving to prepare a place for the disciples and would come again for them, all the other apostles were silent. When it seemed no one else would ask, Thomas did. "Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way?" Why has that question been important to the Christian world over the centuries? Because without it, we would not have had Jesus' answer that we cling to so much in life, because Jesus replied, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." So questions are important. They can beget answers that we can live our lives by. In the film that carries the simple title of Truth, a veteran television news producer defends herself by saying, "They don't get to smack us for simply asking questions." You might say that much of Thomas's life revolved around asking questions in search of truth, even though that truth would prove very uncomfortable for him. It became his life's theme, and when he found it, he acted upon it. And it was truth he found when he saw the nail holes in the hands of the risen Jesus. That was his evidence. That was his proof of truth. In the hymnal of the Christian Reformed Church is found a 1984 hymn by Thomas Troger entitled, "These Things Did Thomas Count as Real." I came across it just the other day, didn't know it existed, really glad I found it, perhaps because I'm also one who struggles at times with faith and always welcomes proof. It spoke to me and helped me understand Thomas some, and it reads like this. These things did Thomas count as real, the warmth of blood, the chill of steel, the grain of wood, the heft of stone, the last frail twitch of blood and bone. His brittle certainties denied that one could live when one had died, until his fingers read like braille the markings of the spear and nail. May we, O God, by grace believe, and in believing still receive, the Christ who held his raw palms out and beckoned Thomas from his doubt. So back to the question, how do you know what you know? Scholars who research that question point out that we don't always base our beliefs on factual evidence. Often we base those beliefs on other things, like the following. But before I list these, ask yourself if any of them have not at times steered you the wrong way. Emotion, role models, including family and friends, instinct, culture, religion, the news and entertainment media, tenacity or stubbornness, and the need to believe. Jesus, who obviously had firsthand knowledge of who he was and why he was here, spoke a lot about truth and how to find it. His life had that theme. He knew what he was about. He was the ultimate living example of Pastor Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. He announced his purpose directly and indirectly several times. In one of his most direct statements, he said, "I am come that you might have life and have it abundantly." In another, his connection with that same concept of truth arose again. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. In fact, God appears to place a great deal of emphasis on truth and his closely related values of light and wisdom. Altogether, those three words are used 582 times throughout the Bible, and truth alone is used more than either of the other two. There are 224 references to truth in the Bible. I think he's trying to tell us something about the importance of truth in our lives. Like many new graduates, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life when I finished college. I thought mostly about going to work, not what I felt was worth working for. My parents had instilled a creativity in me and a love for reading and writing. In a real way, my mom was my first writing teacher, my dad was my first editor, and he also introduced me to photography. I discovered I liked to write and shoot pictures and read, so I majored in journalism at the University of Oklahoma. But in college, I also became a Christian, and my enthusiasm for that took me to seminary in Dallas for a while. My plan was to enter the ministry, but the grander plan didn't work that way. And in the end, I became a journalist. In one real sense, however, I feel I wound up with the same life mission as I would have had in the ministry. Now, a lot of people might scratch their heads over that, perceiving an incongruity between the pulpit and the newsroom. But I discovered there was a common theme there, and that theme was the search for truth. Although a pastor may be more concerned with eternal truths than those of the here and now, the concept of sorting out that which is true from that which is false remains the same. It turns out I wasn't alone in that thinking. Others have faced the same decision between journalism and the pastorate. A friend of mine in Memphis was one, so was another in California. Both chose journalism, both went on and got their PhDs, and ironically, both have the same biblical name of David. Still another was a man you may have heard of, the late Methodist pastor, writer, and founder of Guidepost magazine, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale. His best-known book, The Power of Positive Thinking. Dr. Peale graduated from Ohio Wesleyan University with a degree in journalism, and he began his career as a newspaper reporter before going to seminary in Boston. On more than one occasion, he would cite this same common theme of the search for truth as the thread between ministry and journalism. To me, truth has always been a concept that requires no definition. Yes, interpretation of facts come into play and causes us at times to disagree about what is true, but I felt we would at least be able to agree on how to define truth, right? Recently, I've reconsidered that. Let's take a look at two dictionary meanings of truth. First, truth is the body of real things, events, and facts. And second, truth is a judgment, a proposition, or an idea that is accepted as true. Do these two definitions say the same thing? Not to me. There's an option here, and it's a vexing one facing us. One definition bases truth on reality and facts. The other bases it on an acceptance of an idea. The decision facing all of us, whether in the temporal world or the spiritual world, is just this. Will we base our truth on that which rests on verifiable evidence, or that which we simply accept as being true? At Dallas Theological Seminary, I was privileged to have a gifted theology professor who was the noted biblical scholar and translator, Dr. Charles Ryrie. Some of you may be familiar with his Ryrie Study Bible. One day in class, Dr. Ryrie made a simple statement that has stayed with me until this day. He said, "Your faith is only as valid as the object in which or whom it is placed." Your faith is only as valid as the object in which or whom it is placed. In this one single assertion, he took his stand in defining truth as fact-based reality instead of the other definition based on pure acceptance of an idea. I know it's difficult to come to faith through facts alone. Indeed, the writer of Hebrews tells us now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. By its very nature, faith signals a jumping off place, but we don't jump blindly. We are asked to consider the preponderance of evidence and then, although it may not be as complete as we would like it to be, make a decision. In other words, take a step of faith. But remember, we step from a footing of fact, from the known into the unknown. I'm reminded of Indiana Jones exiting a mountain cave, only to find a deep abyss between him and the continuation of that cave on the facing mountain. Armed with evidence that this is the right way out, Jones steps out into what seems thin air and finds a path of stones emerging, on which he steps safely to the other side. Author Andrea Monda tells us the role that reason played in the conversion of the famed C.S. Lewis, author of the Chronicles of Narnia books and a host of books about Christianity. Lewis was born in 1898 and, after losing his mother as a young child, became an agnostic and then an atheist until age 30, when he realized, as he said, that God was not going to leave me alone. Author Monda writes, "A permanent state of siege. This is what life was like for Cambridge and Oxford Don C.S. Lewis. It was an assault that paradoxically exalted the humility of God, who, like the father of the prodigal son, goes in search of all, even the one who endeavors to flee from his embrace." Lewis himself wrote in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, "I did not see then what is now the most shining and obvious thing, the divine humility which will accept a convert even on such terms." The prodigal son at least walked home on his own 2 feet. But who can duly adore that love which will open the high gates to a prodigal who is brought in kicking, screaming, struggling, resentful, and darting his eyes in every direction for a chance to escape? He concludes, the hardness of God is kinder than the softness of men. In his compulsion, it's our liberation. To Lewis, the world was filled with ample evidence of God, evidence that becomes perils to an atheist. Among those perils he lists are the beauty of nature and art, the gift of joy, the encounter with others, real people, physically known, and those met through the mediation of reading. Lewis issued a gentle warning to skeptics that a young person who wishes to remain a sound atheist cannot be too careful of his reading. There are traps everywhere, Bibles laid open, millions of surprises, fine nets and stratagems. God is, if I may say it, very unscrupulous. This reminds me of something I heard recently. Reading can be dangerous to your ignorance. Andrea Manda concludes, like Nicodemus, Lewis the intellectual had his night filled with light, and his life changed radically. From that moment, he became an ardent defender of faith regained and a refined popularizer of Christian truth. For me, there has always been one fact that I could not ignore nor explain away as fantasy about Christianity, because it is so deeply etched in verifiable reality. The 12 men who walked the earthly sod with Jesus all had enough confidence in his validity that they risked their own lives to tell others that this was truly the Son of God. 11 of them were brutally killed for their beliefs and teachings, and again, Thomas was one of them. If there were no other evidence for Christianity than this, it would probably have been enough for me to have taken the step of faith I did in becoming a Christian. So we see the importance of fact-based truth in the spiritual realm. But it's also a vital part of the temporal world, of the here and now. How can we, on the one hand, defend our spiritual truths on the basis of factual evidence, while at the same time believe that factual evidence is not needed for what we are asked to accept as truth in our everyday world? This may seem like something out of Captain Obvious of the Hotels.com commercials, but it's actually not. There are many people, and I'm one of them, who believe the world is confronting the challenge of a post-truth era. The term post-truth has even made it into the Oxford English Dictionary, and in 2016, the year of our last presidential election was named by that dictionary as Word of the Year, as its usage shot up 2,000%. The dictionary defines post-truth as follows: relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. One reason for this cultural redefinition of truth? Well, there are always those who wish to deceive us for personal gain, and some do a good job. Another reason is the infatuation we have with social media. Here is what Forbes magazine has to say about how just one demographic, millennials, define truth. But I should add that I don't believe this just applies to millennials. I think it applies to all of us who have this love affair with our smartphones and with our laptops. Consider for a moment, Forbes says, how millennials consume news. They open their phone or laptop to their social media of choice. Immediately, they began scrolling through a real-time news feed of videos, photos, comments, and headlines that are shared by their network of friends. Each post is accompanied by the sharer's opinion or reaction. There are implicit assumptions made by the reader based on their relationship to the sharer. Now add to that the bias or opinion expressed by the originator of that content. With just one passing glance, millennials are processing complex media with multiple layers of bias attached, and they do this excessively. In fact, the average millennial checks his or her smartphone more than 150 times each day. We live in a time when every statement or belief seems to get politicized. And so it's even hard to talk about truth without sounding like you're supporting a political candidate or a party. But we must remember that truth is not tethered to nor owned by any political party, politician, or movement. We don't call something true because it's something a Democrat or Republican says, or at least we shouldn't. We call it true because we've looked at it ourselves, and there's enough factual evidence to support its claim to truth. The same should be so in our spiritual beliefs as well. We shouldn't believe in the truth of Christ because of the Christian religion or because someone else tells us it's so. We should believe in it because we've looked at it and we've discovered that there is evidence there to support that belief. Again, Dr. Ryrie comes to mind. Your faith is only as valid as the object in which or whom it is placed. But it's not easy to believe something new and different, is it? A person's comfort zone is almost always found in what he or she has always believed. Coming to a new truth is coming to a new reality, a new norm, and that's not very comfortable. One small example. What happens to you when you emerge from a darkened movie theater to the bright sunlight of an afternoon sky? There is an assault on your visual senses, and it takes just a moment to adjust to it. Once that happens, though, most of us don't want to go back into the darkness. And so we return to our two opening questions. How do we know what we know? How much of our life do we base on those beliefs? Jesus himself had to answer these questions while in his wilderness period. Were the arguments and the urgings of Satan true or false, and what should he do about them? Each of us, sometimes it seems on a daily basis, must do the same. Jesus had it right. The truth will set us free. But truth is so very important that we owe it to ourselves and others to ensure that what we are believing is true. God has created a desire in all of us to know and seek the truth. And it's hard to believe he would have done that without providing ample evidences of truth. He asks us to use the minds he gave us, our side of the bargain, seek the evidence, and then act upon it, just like Thomas did. Thank you.